Right now, at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, lies one of the largest collections of rare books and manuscripts in the world. The library was established to preserve historical documents, housing texts that date back centuries. Among these is a manuscript acquired in 1912 by a rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich. At the time, it was part of a collection kept at a Jesuit college in Italy, where it had remained for years. The book itself dates back to the early 15th century and is written entirely by hand on vellum. Its pages are filled with lines of text, accompanied by detailed illustrations of plants, diagrams, and human figures. At first glance, it looks like a typical medieval manuscript, but there is one problem. No one has ever been able to read it. It consists of around 240 pages, all written by hand on vellum, and every page is filled with text, not fragments or isolated symbols, but continuous writing that stretches across the entire document. The text is composed of a unique set of characters, arranged in words and repeated patterns, as if it follows a consistent system. At a glance, it looks like any other written language. The words have similar lengths, certain symbols appear more frequently than others, and the structure seems deliberate rather than random. Alongside the text, the manuscript is divided into sections, each accompanied by illustrations. Some pages show plants, others contain circular diagrams that resemble astronomical or cosmological charts, and some depict human figures placed within strange, interconnected structures. The level of detail suggests that this was not a casual or decorative work. It was written with purpose, as if it was meant to communicate information. But despite all of this, the writing itself does not correspond to any known alphabet or language. And that is where the problem begins. At this point, the manuscript begins to become difficult to explain. Because when you look at the text more closely, it doesn't behave like something random. The document contains tens of thousands of words, all written using the same set of symbols, organized consistently throughout its pages. Some words appear multiple times, others less frequently, and certain structures repeat in similar positions. This kind of behavior is typical of a real language. In any language, words do not appear completely at random. There is pattern, there is frequency, there is organization. And the text in the manuscript follows exactly this kind of logic. The problem is that, despite these characteristics, it does not correspond to any known language. It is not Latin, it is not any medieval European language, and it does not clearly match any known cipher system. It looks like a language, but it doesn't fit into anything we understand, and that alone would already be unusual. But the illustrations make the situation even more confusing. Many of the pages show plants drawn in considerable detail, as if they were meant to be identified. But when compared to real species, nothing matches exactly. They resemble real plants, but they are not identical to any known species. In other sections, there are circular diagrams that resemble astronomical maps or cosmological structures. Some elements suggest stars or organized patterns, but again, nothing can be confirmed with certainty. There are also sections with human figures, often placed inside interconnected structures, as if they were part of some kind of system or process. When you look at each element individually, everything seems almost understandable, but when you put it all together, nothing fully aligns. Over the last century, the manuscript hasn't been ignored. Quite the opposite. It has been studied by people whose job was to break codes. Both amateur and professional cryptographers have worked on it, including American and British code breakers connected to World War I and World War II, individuals trained to decipher real encrypted communication. Among them were Prescott Currier, William Friedman, Elizabeth Friedman, and John Tiltman, people who specialized not only in language, but in patterns, ciphers, and complex systems. And even then, none of them were able to produce a verifiable reading. This matters because it rules out a simple explanation. The manuscript was not ignored, and it wasn't dismissed due to lack of interest. It was examined by highly qualified experts and still resisted. As technology advanced, the approach changed. Researchers began analyzing the text using statistical and computational methods, focusing on its structure rather than trying to translate it directly. These studies showed that the manuscript does not behave like random text. The distribution of words follows patterns similar to natural languages, including consistent frequency, structured repetition, and internal organization. In some analyses, around 90% of the text's characteristics align with real linguistic systems, rather than meaningless strings of symbols. At the same time, other analyses indicate that it does not fit any known encryption system. Simple substitution ciphers fail to explain the structure of the text. More complex systems, such as polyalphabetic ciphers, also fail to reproduce the patterns observed in the manuscript. In other words, it doesn't behave like a normal language, but it also doesn't behave like a conventional code. Subtle variations in handwriting indicate the presence of multiple scribes, suggesting that the manuscript may not be the work of a single isolated author, but rather something produced within a broader context. And that changes the scale of the problem. Over time, this stopped being just a failed attempt at translation and became part of the story itself. The parchment it was written on has been dated to the early 15th century, between 1404 and 1438, placing its creation somewhere in the early 1400s. Its exact origin is still unknown, although stylistic analysis suggests it may have been produced in Italy during the Renaissance. From that point on, its early history becomes unclear. For more than a century, there is no confirmed record of where it was or who owned it. The first confirmed owner appears much later, in 17th century Prague. The manuscript was in the possession of Georg Baresch, an alchemist who described it as something like a sphinx, a text that occupied space in his library, but made no sense. Trying to understand it, Baresch sent samples of the writing to the Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher in Rome, hoping he might be able to identify or decode it. After Baresch's death, the manuscript passed to Jan Marek Marci, who later sent the entire book to Kircher around 1665 or 1666, along with a letter explaining its history. In that letter, Marci also mentioned a claim that the manuscript may have once belonged to Emperor Rudolf II, who was said to have purchased it for a significant sum, although this has never been confirmed. From that point forward, the manuscript is believed to have remained within the Jesuit collections associated with the Collegio Romano in Italy. It likely stayed there for centuries, largely out of public view, preserved but still unread. Then, in 1912, it resurfaced. Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish book dealer, acquired the manuscript from a group of documents being sold from that collection. From that moment on, the manuscript entered the modern world, and with it, a new wave of attempts to understand it. After Voynich's death, the manuscript passed through several hands: Ethel Voynich, Anne Nill, and later the dealer Hans-Peter Krauss, who was unable to find a buyer. In 1969, it was donated to Yale University. Today, it remains there, preserved in the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, catalogued as MS408. And that is what gives the manuscript its scale. This is not just a strange book. It is an object that has moved across countries, through scholars, collectors, and institutions, surviving for over 600 years. It has been studied, analyzed, and questioned across generations. At this point, the manuscript leaves us with a few possible explanations. Some believe it's a cipher, a real message, intentionally hidden behind a system we still haven't managed to break. Others suggest it could be a language, either lost to time or entirely constructed, written in a script that no longer exists anywhere else. And then there's the possibility that it isn't meant to be read at all, that the text was designed to look meaningful, without actually containing a message. None of these explanations have been proven, and none of them fully explain everything we see in the manuscript, because whatever this is, it behaves like a real system. It has structure, repetition, and internal logic. But at the same time, it refuses to connect to anything we understand. And that's what makes it different. This isn't just an unsolved code. It's something that looks like it should be readable, but isn't. Something that feels familiar, but doesn't belong to any known system. And after centuries of study, analysis, and failed attempts, it's still exactly where it started: undecipherable.